Welcome to 1000 PS TV. Today we took a look at the Honda Africa Twin Cylinder in the off-road version and the Suzuki V-Strom 1050DE, also in the off-road version in comparison. I took the Wolf with me and we rode together to test these two fantastic motorcycles, and they are, if you look at these mid-range touring enduros, which for me includes the Tiger 900 and the KTM 890 and so on, they are rather top of the range. I think you can say that, not only because they have more displacement, so we have over 1 liter displacement in both, 1037 in the Suzuki and 1084 cubic centimeters even in the Africa Twin Cylinder, but also in terms of price. So we're really at the top end of this class here, but they also offer a lot, both of them. And I think you can also see relatively clearly what the respective manufacturer means by off-road capable, because the Suzuki now has a 21-inch front wheel, but we have exactly 10 millimeters more travel than the standard 1050, which means 170 at the front and 169 at the rear, while the Africa Twin Cylinder with 230 millimeters at the front and 220 at the rear shows where it wants to go and where it belongs. Let's maybe start with the rider's impressions of the road, because that's where we've mainly been today, because as unfortunate as it is, most people out there don't use the off-road capabilities of their bikes. I count myself among them. I have an Africa Twin Cylinder and ride it a lot on the road because they are great bikes there too. And maybe I'll start with the Honda. I know it really well and I've got a different suspension to mine, but the standard suspension works well too. But you do notice, because of the length of the travel, that it dives in when braking or braking hard. The brakes work well, but the whole riding performance is just a bit more crunchy, I would say, than on the V-Strom. How did you find it?
Exactly the impression you've described there now, I have too. So on the road, especially when it gets a bit sportier, when it gets a bit faster, the V-Strom is already more stable in the bend. But I still find that the Africa Twin Cylinder is absolutely fun to ride. And I enjoy it with these wide handlebars, simply this nimble handling, this large steering angle and so on. So it's also very, very funny to ride on such narrow bends like we had up there on the mountain.
Exactly, that was really first gear and 20 kilometers per hour. So that was really a relatively low speed range. And it was easier for me on the Africa Twin Cylinder because of the width of the handlebars. You've already mentioned it, the impact is significantly bigger than on the V-Strom. But it's also the case that the V-Strom, in my opinion, can't quite conceal its weight, especially when things get really tight. We're talking about 254 kilos here. We weighed it on the scales with a full tank of gas. I mean, you also have 7 crash bars on the bottom and so on. That's already included, of course. But when it gets really tight, you just notice the weight. Did you feel the same way?
Yes, it's very, very balanced though, so they've really got it right. This is now the first V-Strom with a 21-inch front wheel. We have a 17-inch wheel at the back. We have an 18-inch wheel there, although I always find the rear less disturbing on gravel. But it's very, very balanced, but the weight can no longer be denied. I think the Africa Twin Cylinder looks lighter than it is when you're riding it anyway, from all the posturing, but you can't deny the weight.
Exactly, 228. We weighed it full-throated on the 1000 PS scale. So that's a difference of over 25 kilos. And what I also noticed on the highway is that both have moved. The seating position in the V-Strom is clearly more integrated. We have the non-adjustable windscreen compared to the normal one, but it's still higher than the one on the Africa Twin Cylinder. So here I sit much more on the bike. And in this respect, I find it easier to direct and push on the Africa Twin Cylinder than on the V-Strom. But apart from that, the V-Strom, yes, simply a rock-solid character, and I think you notice that in the engine too. It's very nice to have the last V2 in this class. If you look at the Multistrada V2 again now, if you take away the Multistrada, which is even less off-road oriented, it's a really cool engine, but you can tell that it's getting on in years. So the Africa Twin Cylinder offers a bit more, right?
Yes, in terms of torque, of course, with the Africa Twin Cylinder, You always have the pull in every situation. But I'm also a fan of this 1050 V-Strom engine. So that's still the biggest argument in favor of the bike for me.
Yes, although I found it interesting because here we have this pure two-cylinder with the 270 degrees poppet pin offset, and that's supposed to imitate the V2, and I think it even surpasses the original in terms of reviness, and somehow I just love the engine so much. And I wouldn't even need the SC Project exhaust that Honda Austria has now fitted to it, because the standard sound of the Africa Twin cylinder is already so good, but it's unbelievably fun to rev it. And there's also something at high RPMs, but you don't need that at all. On both bikes, the next gear at 6,000 or 7,000 RPM is perfectly adequate.
Alone or with Sozia, both are
Exactly.
absolutely
That really puts us in a class where that's
sovereign.
Exactly. Where sovereignty is a given. And it doesn't really matter what you take with you. Otherwise, the seat, I have to say, on the V-Strom, if we want to talk about ergonomics now, V-Strom doesn't have an adjustable seat height, whereas the Africa Twin cylinder is adjustable in 20 kilometers. I think we have 8.55 here, and here we have 8.50 and 8.70. And the V-Strom seat is clearly the more comfortable cushion. From my point of view, have you been riding both for any length of time?
Yes, especially the Africa Twin, but I also rode the V-Strom for quite a long time during the test in Greece at the launch, and it really has a bit more comfort as far as that is concerned, but we are also in the same area. Both are very, very comfortable, but perhaps a little more there. We also have fully adjustable suspension elements on both, just with significantly less travel, as you said.
Yeah, so maybe this topic of off-road capability to the two bikes, I'll just let you do it now. Please, Wolf, what would you choose if you could, and why?
So if it's really about riding everywhere as much as you enjoy them and as balanced as that standing position is, definitely the Africa Twin cylinder. It simply offers more, it's lighter, it has more travel, it is even more balanced for me in terms of the whole standing position. So it really is one of the best touring enduro bikes for off-road riding.
What it also has going for it is just the higher ground clearance. So I imagine that if you go somewhere over a larger wooden stump or coarser gravel, or maybe where there are boulders lying around, you might still be somewhere at high RPMs with it, where it still sits up with it.
Exactly. I think the V-Strom is still primarily for the road, but now with the TE, with the Dual Explorer, it simply offers the opportunity to ride more unpaved things, to ride rougher things. But the Africa Twin cylinder, it screams for it directly. I can hardly ride past a dirt road on the Africa Twin cylinder because I always have to ride into it.
That also continues in electronics, so we have significantly more options here on the Africa Twin cylinder to switch on the riding modes to fit. Traction control and ABS are specifically designed to rule. So traction control, especially with some levels terrain, I think there are 7 in total. We have fewer on the V-Strom. We also have our own gravel mode on both, but I can configure myself much more on the Honda than on the V-Strom.
The basic setting of the gravel mode on the V-Strom is successful, I think. Okay, so purely in terms of the electronics, because it doesn't intervene as much as the gravel mode here, but then you still have this off-road mode. And that's again more for people who want to let a rear wheel come in and so on. But you're right, you definitely have more adjustability with the Honda, but I think this pre-selected program on the Suzuki is very successful.
Yes, maybe that actually belongs a bit to the engine topic. We haven't talked about it before, but I think the response of the Suzuki engine is much better than that of the Africa Twin cylinder. I have this slightly rough feeling in almost every mode because there is so much power available at low revs. And that brings unrest to the suspension and the whole ride, which the Suzuki doesn't have. But as I said, there's a lot going on there too, and I have it myself. I always really enjoy it. But on the Suzuki here, maybe especially if you're a beginner, off-road, it's a bit more accessible. Yes, yes. Otherwise, electronics, to finish off this chapter, we have Apple cable integration here. The Suzuki doesn't offer that. You do have the option of connecting a cell phone here. Connectivity is available, but as it is in the Honda, there is no second time in this segment. And yes, we already have our own videos about it. For those who are interested in how cable works here, I refer you to my travel video from Tuscany and Trentino, for example. I will explain it in detail there, but it doesn't always have to be Apple cables because we've now simply used Kalimoto on both of them, quad lock position, and navigated with Kalimoto using the cell phone. It also works wonderfully. It all depends on what suits you. It simply depends on your personal preferences and requirements. But when it comes to features, it's fair to mention that the Suzuki has quick shifter and cruise control as standard, two features that I would definitely add to the Africa Twin cylinder. However, the Honda also comes at a price, and that brings them a bit closer together in terms of price. Okay, they're both touring bikes, and Honda takes the issue of wind protection here with the Africa Twin cylinder. I then fitted a higher one on mine. Not too serious in the basic version, or you just orientate yourself off-road. On the V-Strom, we have the one that for some reason is not adjustable compared to the standard version, a higher windshield. But is it still low enough for you for off-road riding?
You can easily see over them. I'm still more of a fan of these short ones. Quite simply, especially when it gets a bit rougher, it's always nice or good to see what's going on in front of the front wheel. But that's also possible with this one.
One more point I have to make, because I noticed it, fuel consumption wise, the V-Strom is on you can tell the older engine, the older design, on a different level than the Africa Twin. Although it is perhaps even a little inferior in terms of performance, it still swallows about a litre more. That surprised me. Fuel tank capacity perhaps for the sake of completeness. 18.8 litres fits with the Africa Twin, and 20 litres is 1 litre difference with the V-Strom, whereby you still get further with the Africa Twin due to the lower consumption, but both are on the same level. So 300 kilometers are easily possible. I don't think there's anything to complain about at all. Well, I think that's it. That's it. An impression of these two machines. What do you think out there? How did Suzuki's first foray into this class with a really long-tail bike go? Does it come close to the Africa Twin cylinder from your point of view, or is it still the king of the touring enduros? Let us know what you think. Write us a comment and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. Otherwise, Wolf, many thanks to you. Many thanks also to the motivated camera team who held out in the blazing sun all morning today. And I forgot to put sunscreen on, so I have to go. Have a good one. See you in the next video.
Ciao.
Ciao.